comments after yesterday. Today, this day is called It's Not All About Grasshopper. So we would like to show other tools that architects can use to create computational design, not only architects, designers as well. And one of such tools was made in our office in Subdigital, and it was made for the Slovak Design Center. The software is called Urban Selector. We will talk about it a little bit more in the third and fourth block today. And we invited Lucia to actually make an interview with Janči, who is our programmer. And Lucia is sitting on two chairs. One is the chair of the Slovak Design Center, and she was in a way our client, or she was the one who was responsible for the project on the side of our client when we were programming the software. And also Lucia is a maker, a curator, a chairwoman of a festival called Sensorium. We can maybe talk a little bit about Sensorium first. I will paste a link to the festival, to the comments, and also to the chat, so that you can have a little bit more look. And maybe Lucia, could you tell us a little bit more about Sensorium?
Yes, thank you very much for the nice introduction. And thank you for inviting me for this session. Yeah, so Sensorium is a festival of digital arts and digital culture. Today it has really, it brings together various formats from talks, conferences, discussion panels to interactive installations and even online meetings in today's context. We started in 2016 as a conference about, basically creative tools for people who combine art and coding or design and coding. And however, that has been changing over the years. And today we are more focusing on, I would say, wider topics about the societal context of relationships between technology and everyday life. And we want to talk about how is our life with technology, and how is our life in after the digital revolution, and maybe how could it be nicer and better. So that's
Thank you.
short.
Also, it's some sort of a miracle that such a festival is happening here in Bratislava, Slovakia, because there are new media artists, but until Sensorium came, they didn't have any platform, a regular place where they would meet in such an ambitious international setup. So congratulations.
Yeah, exactly. That is a very important aspect of the festival. That we really put stress on building certain kind of community and building a platform for people to share experience, share know-how, find collaborators. That is a very important element of why we are doing what we are doing.
Cool. Before you start, and I will mute myself, Janči, could you tell us a little bit more about your educational background? Because we know that you are working with us now as a programmer, but you also have your own project. You're kind of freelancing, but that's not, maybe we don't have to talk about that, but also where are you coming from?
So, yeah, so for quite a few years now already, my background is basically in two things, and that is computer science and cognitive science. So as a computer scientist, I'm supposed to understand how to build software, how to build it in a robust and safe way, and also probably fast way. And as a cognitive scientist, I'm supposed to, let's say, model and try to understand both artificial minds and human minds, animal minds. So that is kind of a research area of mine. At the same time, I really enjoy doing computer graphics, and that's pretty much how we met and how we started working together.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, thank you both. I will leave you now for the interview. So I guess that Lucia is going to ask Janči, but maybe it can also go both ways. It's up to you. The stage is yours. Thank you for agreeing to do this.
Thank you for your invitation.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, so yeah, I can start, of course.
Yeah,
so
by all means.
It's a, I think it's a really nice topic, the topic of our conversation, and the topic of how do I would say, well, yeah, programmers or coders collaborate with creatives. I think there are many Pandora boxes in this whole topic, and I think well, we already, of course, discussed what could we talk about, but let's see whether we get exactly into those corners or not.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah. But yeah, so maybe where should we start? I will speak from the perspective of someone who very often has to be somehow a translator from well, either in one way or the opposite direction. So from programmers to creatives, or from creatives who want to translate their ideas into things that require programming software or even physical devices. And I can say that very often, of course, artists or designers, but let's maybe focus on speaking about artists first, because artists have very specific ideas and concepts very often that they need to translate into their projects, into physical things, or yeah, somehow into reality. And maybe the way they start translating their ideas is not starting with practical and maybe like super logical processes, and it's mainly about, okay, how can I communicate this really important idea that I have in my head to as many people as possible, or at least to the target audience, right? And then there's the moment when they start talking to people who are complementary, or who have complementary skills to theirs, and can help them realize their projects. And that's where the conversation starts. And in my experience, then very often what happens is considerably early on, a little bit of disappointment, or maybe a little bit more of disappointment than both parties count on. And yeah, maybe that's the moment when you, Janči, want to say something about this process.
I can say the feeling is mutual. I'm joking. To give a bit of background about programming and software engineering in general, I don't know how this came to be, but there's this saying, or this pattern of thought within programmers, that the clients usually don't really know what they want upfront, and well, many iterations of the product or the software need to be made for both the programmers and the actual client to figure out what the final product should be. So we are used to thinking in really exact ways, and we like exact specifications, but the real world, it's not like that. In the real world, you have a general idea of what you want to build, but you don't necessarily know if everything is going to work the way it's supposed to. So if the nature of the collaboration is not so equal, I would say, then the programmers can feel that, okay, so the client actually isn't totally sure what's supposed to happen, but the relationship looks like they are. So usually, at least what I always try to do is try to discuss with the client all the possibilities that they perhaps haven't thought about yet. So we can, even before we start writing any code, before we start building things, we can discover if there's any flaws in the current thinking. And of course, even after we start programming, it's really important to iterate quickly, to always show the client what we have, so we can change direction of the project as necessary. This is sometimes not easy when, for instance, the budget of the project is already fixed and there's a deadline and there needs to be something done. Of course, not every project is a research project. So for some kinds of project, it's perfectly okay to have an upfront deadline and a fixed budget.
I have a question, maybe. When you're talking about your work, you're saying when you work with a client, do you feel there's a difference between working with a client and working in a creative collaboration between you and an artist on an artistic project? As in, I can imagine that that's a bit of a different relationship. And a bit of a different process, right? Like maybe would you feel that maybe instead of working with a client, you're more having a collaboration? Yeah, how do you perceive this?
So this is actually really interesting. I haven't worked with that many artists, but the experience is usually very positive overall, and that is because all of those are digital artists or new media artists that know how to program. Perhaps they don't do it for a living, but we can switch to the same language, and there isn't this very weird communications barrier there. With regular clients, the communication is way more difficult. You have to somehow translate between the two worlds, between business and programming. So in the way people communicate, sometimes it's really easy to say fuzzy things, and the other person knows or thinks they know what you're talking about. But computers aren't that forgiving. So the computer does exactly what you tell it to do, and it's the programmer's job to once again be a translator of what you think the program should do, and give this translation to the computer, which is actually really simple and dumb in a way. It's really fast, but also really dumb. So you have to tell it exactly what to do. Anyway, back to the topic. I would say my collaboration with artists has been great, and it's because there's well, not only, but also because there was much less translation required. Perhaps I just haven't worked with a non-programmer artist yet, so I'll have to see.
And let's maybe talk a little bit about complexity of projects. And what happens to complexity of ideas that are there at the beginning of collaborations or of such collaborations. So in most projects I have been involved in, there are really big ambitions at the beginning, and very often what happens is that these ambitious ideas require ambitious processes behind them in order to make them happen. And very often we find out that in creative projects we have very often many limits. We have very little time. We have usually I would even say in comparison to commercial projects, extremely limited budgets. And we have very limited human resources as well, very often. So what happens to a very ambitious creative project, or like when someone approaches you, like, I don't know, I have an idea for an installation, and this installation should be like really huge, you know, like it will be on a main square in the capital city, and 100 people should interact with it at the same time, and it should be, I don't know, connected to Wi-Fi, and and turn on and off on its own and react to sunset. So yeah, but what happens in these situations? How do you drive those projects? How can you make sure that on one hand you don't lose the creative concept, and on the other hand that you still have something technically uh, possible and doable? And maybe I'm not so much asking about the technicalities of the process, but more about like what kind of conversations do you have with your collaborators or your clients? Yeah, how does that work?
Mhm. This is once again a very dear topic of mine. So I would just give first a disclaimer that we as programmers sometimes have this learned helplessness, that we already know we are pretty terrible at estimating how long things are going to take. It's usually it usually takes, I don't know, twice as much time, and that's a very good case. So what we are really wary of in all kinds of projects is that we try to drive the complexity down, and we can do that as a collaboration with the client, perhaps by starting by asking questions. So what is the core of the idea? And perhaps also sometimes some of the features actually just distract from the main core concept of the project. So it could even be beneficial for the art itself. But yeah, just the matter of effort of the work that we have to do, it's very good that we can sometimes or usually drive that down to a smaller subset of features that both shows the product better and gives us a more reasonable amount of time to do all those things. Yeah, let me think some more on that.
And yeah, like this is like a little dance that we have to do together, right? And would you say it's important that in these processes maybe there are people who can yeah, like I'm just thinking about language now, as I also mentioned to you yesterday, because I think that's very important. And very often what happens is that already the conversation about the project can be challenging, because we don't share the same language, not in terms of like linguistics, but in terms of maybe profession, or just a field, and also in terms of perception of your work and of my work as a creative, for example. And also maybe it's not only about language, but also about values in the creative process, right? So the different things are important for me and different things are important for you. And actually that's something I would like us to talk about a little bit. Yeah, so how I imagine from the perspective of an artist, my priorities are that my ideas are clearly communicated to my audience. And how do you perceive this in the projects? Like, I can imagine your ambitions might be more about the quality of what is behind the project, right?
also, but not only. So as you said, the difference in language is there, but I would say it stems from perhaps a difference of culture. So as you said, you'd like to think about how to about the concepts of your project and how to impress people. And the programmer, on the other hand, would like to think about if the thing is even physically possible to do. So, and those two have to meet. Otherwise, there's no project. So that's why perhaps sometimes we look really negative and negativistic. In the way, in our own way, we are trying to help. We just been trained perhaps too much to predict various failure modes, and we try to avoid those as much as possible. So the difference in culture then makes this clash that you'd really like to have this ambitious idea, and we know or have an intuition for how much work that will be, or if it's even physically possible, because there are some things that unless you cheat somehow, they are not really achievable. So I don't know, the universe will first cool and then your computation finishes or something. So
and like would you say there is something that particularly helps in the conversation? Like what do you have you had situations where you were really trying to explain like to someone that look, this is really not possible, we really have to scale down this idea, and you know, like I can imagine that can be very frustrating for the other party. How, yeah, is there something you feel helps in this conversation?
absolutely. So the way I usually do it is by asking questions. And these questions are usually about some edge cases of the presentation or of the product. So these very special cases need to be resolved somehow, and the client or the artist should be aware that there's some certain conditions that in which the product must behave in some concrete way. And by asking those questions, I just bring it to light that this is something we need to think about before we do it. It's not that we don't want to do it. We actually really like to solve hard problems. That's why we are programmers. But we also like to think about things, or at least I do, a bit upfront, so that we don't hit a wall when it's already too late in the project. So yeah.
And do you maybe have like a specific example of a project that had to be scaled down, but at the same time the you know, the idea or the concept didn't suffer so much? And
Oh, I think it's every project I've worked on ever, but one particular actually does come to mind. A couple of years back, we made an interactive model with Jan. I think he already showed this on the previous day. It was this huge table with 4K screens. So in there, in particular, there was an algorithm that was partitioning regions of the 2D space for the buildings. And the way we at first conceived the algorithm, it was going to run a really long time. So, but we really needed the thing that the algorithm does. So what we decided to do is that we limit the data that comes in. So if the data is small enough, it doesn't really mean that that doesn't really matter that much that the algorithm, if it's that efficient or not, or that computationally complex. So in this particular case, we actually modified the data, and that was a compromise. So the algorithm was the only possible for that thing, but it also, if we fed it too much data, it would take hours to compute. So we decided to scale down the data. In the end, we managed to polish the product in other ways. So this actually didn't show that much or at all. So sometimes you can hide these scale downs. Of course, the other really important for me scale down would be on the urban selector project, where we were initially, even I myself was much more ambitious, but as we were building things, we just discovered that, oh, this is way much more effort than we imagined initially. And then we just had to make a decision. So we need to deliver by some deadline, and we need to have something that works, and we at least know what to improve later. And those were also some really hard decisions. But this making of decisions is actually really crucial. That you need to, when you need to cut something off the project, it needs to be the correct thing to cut off. So the project still gives a cohesive idea.
I'm just being aware of time. I don't know whether
I think it's fine if you still have something to discuss. I think we can keep going for a couple of more minutes.
Okay. Yeah, so I just wanted to ask about about like the topic of cheating in projects, and I think yeah, that's a really nice tool. Cheating is a very nice tool and should be used,
especially in school.
especially whole life. Yeah, so did you yeah, like what kinds of cheats do you usually use in projects, and like where's the limit? Like how do you think about this, and where is it maybe appropriate to cheat, and where is for you like, okay, this has to be really proper, and we cannot really go around here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that usually comes down to the simple question of, will I have to look at the code of the project anytime in the future or not? So if it's a one-off project, like perhaps the stuff we did for the exhibition, the ghost walkers, that was done really quickly. I mean, the code itself isn't that terrible. It's actually pretty okay. But when we did that, we knew that this was a one-time thing, and we'll never have to look at the code again. So in those cases, I would say it's very okay to cheat, because it saves you time, energy, money to work on other things. And in those cases, that is the art, or the exhibition itself is the product. On the other hand, if the project is supposed to be supported for a great amount of time, then it really doesn't pay off to cheat. It will catch up to you, and you will have to fix those things anyway. And they may be more difficult to fix later. So you need to somehow balance it. So you don't want to be too correct up front, because you don't even know exactly what you're building. So it's okay to rewrite some parts of it. But at the same time, you want to have the ability to quickly change what's in the code. So you don't want to close on all possibilities, close all doors.
And I think I don't know, Janči, whether you had something else that we haven't covered yet, but I think from my side it was pretty much it, and I wonder whether there are some questions from other people actually.
Yeah, we can open this discussion to the audience.
Yes, let's do it.
I'm also checking Facebook meanwhile.
Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was to know like what is the bridge between programmers and the artists. When I always go exhibition, I always see the results, and sometimes people don't think about the background, who is working like programmers. And then Jan says that like asking questions also crucial when the project starts, like for example in initial process. So I would like to ask Jan that like how you know the right questions to ask. Like, you know, sometimes because artists are so abstract and their idea kind of so crazy, it might be crazy. So how you know the right questions and how you know, like, yeah, this was the right question and I got the right answers for that. So yeah, that's my question.
Okay, so first off, crazy ideas are great, and I really love working on crazy ideas. And as to your question, it's kind of difficult to answer, and the answer would actually be that I have perhaps worked on way too many projects that didn't ask the questions, and I didn't want to go through that process again. So I'm trying to be mindful of that ahead of time. And just as you see things in the wild, in the software engineering world, there's just some situations you don't want to ever see again, like fixing a very obscure bug that is I don't know, not letting customers do their thing, and the company is losing a lot of money because of that, and it's all the programmers' team's fault for some reason. So with that background, it taught me to try to analyze the situation up front. I'm sorry, I can't really give a good answer. It's pretty much just intuition and having seen things in the past.
Maybe I can add to that. In my experience, well, like the whole, yeah, of course you cannot know the questions. Also specifically in creative projects, each project is just super unique, and you have never been through the same process twice, or maybe you share some basic, there are some basic steps that you can repeat, but otherwise you just don't know. But I think what helps and what can be pre-arranged is having a good project manager who has been through similar processes and can understand both sides, or like I would call it a project manager who speaks both languages and can translate between the two parties in a good way. And that person, or even without that mediator, sort of, the two collaborators, I think, can always talk a lot about their expectations and share as much also throughout the process. I think the conversations in various stages of the project are as important as any conversation at the beginning. So like, you need constant reality checks, and that brings out the correct questions, I would say, but you don't know them upfront most of the time.
Yeah, that reminds me that we actually need a good project manager.
Yeah.
All right. Are there any more questions or comments or remarks? I'm also checking Facebook. Okay. It seems like that's it. No. Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
For Lucia, and this question for the, like, seeing the things from the artist's part. And when the artists know how to programming, so is it like always positive way, or there is something which is good if you don't know, like in the case of knowing programming? So, you know, sometimes if you don't know something, it might turn out the good things, like the great ideas. So how you are, I mean, what you think about this thing, like knowing things or not knowing things?
Do you mean as in having skills in programming, or not having, like, whether having programming skills can be a bad thing?
Not the bad thing, not the bad thing, but just like, you know, just give the idea about if something is good when you know programming or not, like in the artist side.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's really helpful if the creative collaborator is familiar with technical processes and with programming processes. I think then the conversation is just much easier. but it can also get more challenging because the expectations might get much higher. And yeah, but to be honest, I don't think it's ever a bad thing when someone has more skills. So no, I would say it can be very helpful for the conversation, at least to be aware of how programmers work and think and what are their priorities, and like what is important in such projects. Like for me, it was really very often a big lesson to understand that there are certain areas of projects where you cannot really do a compromise, like certain functionalities, I'm trying to think of an example, but especially things that are functions for public and that are very core, like maybe at the beginning I would often think that oh, maybe we can improvise this part of the project and maybe it doesn't have to be perfect. But then I understood that if one part of the project is not perfect, then maybe it builds up more problems deeper in the project. And yeah, maybe if I would have a deeper understanding of how coding works, then I wouldn't at the beginning make those assumptions like, oh, we can improvise this. And I think then the expectations are also more on the same level than, yeah, when you just have no idea at all and you come up with constantly with ideas that are over ambitious for the other side, so the technical collaborator. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yes, thank you so much. It makes sense, yeah, what you said.
I would also like to add something to it, if I may. I think it's always a good thing to have certain knowledge and skill, but also with this specific knowledge and skill, it can hold you back. You might be actually not ambitious enough. And but I think it's not about having the skills, it's about having an attitude. So having the skills is always a good idea, and you should, even as an artist, you should keep the, even as an artist that knows coding, you should keep the attitude of having no limitations and trying and attempting. And I think there is one major difference, that as an artist, you usually have a very vague idea of the result, and you are doing stuff and improvising over when you are doing something, and at a certain point you realize, okay, I might change it completely or change the ambition completely and change the goal completely over time, and that's it. And you can do that also when you're programming. But if you actually have an assignment, if you have some brief from a client and doing a non-artistic programming project, you cannot improvise too much, and you have to think everything through at the very beginning. And I think that's just a difference in the attitude. You just change the attitude when you are working on an artistic project, because then you can improvise even when you are coding and programming, and you can change what the goal is in real time while you're doing stuff.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. That's actually really interesting what you said. For some reason, I would say the lack of ambition and creativity for some reason correlates with programmers, and I think we would really it would do a great deal for us if we could still think more freely and not censor ourselves that much, because well, for me it's kind of a form of censorship. By knowing too much, I'm paralyzed and I cannot make the really bold decisions, because I already know how much work that will be. So this is perhaps something that the programmer side can work on.
And which is also true. It is usually a lot of work, but at the same time, when you see that you have not a perfect solution, but good enough, then sometimes it is good enough. And it cannot be good enough when you're working in IT and you need to deliver a software that performs and serves its purpose. But it's different in art, I think, because usually it's about experimentation. It's usually about trying to achieve something. Even a failure is a good result, and so on. So I think it's good to know that some problems are very complicated and maybe they can be solved at all. But at the end, it's good to try, and maybe along the way you will find something that is valuable as well. Okay, do we have any more comments, or anybody would like to say something? Okay, it seems not. Thank you both. We've got a thank you in the chat. Thank you, Lucia. We are not going to talk to each other today anymore. Thank you for joining us. It was a valuable contribution. I'm always happy when you contribute to our debates. It seems like you're on a vacation, so enjoy.
Thank you.
I should also advertise the Sensorium Festival. I posted links both on Facebook and here in the chat. And also, I think I can post a link to a podcast that we made together in this setup regarding the urban selector, regarding the software that we are talking about now, today. So maybe that's a different viewpoint that we are going to have today. And you are part of that as well. So I will post a link. Thank you, Lucia. Have a nice day. And
thank you very much for invitation. It was really nice.
Always a pleasure.
To be part of this. Yeah, thanks a lot. And thank you for the participants to join us.